Nobody at all wants to surrender.
This is actually kinda enjoyable.
Stupefy! I have him! He's here!
In 2011, 10 years after the release of the first Harry Potter movie and the respective video game tie-ins, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 came to theaters, marking an end to the Harry Potter movie adaptation saga and in turn the end of the regular Harry Potter movie tie-in releases published by Electronic Arts. As with all other Harry Potter games, several versions have been released, in this case 3, and today we're taking a look at the PC, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and Wii version developed by EA Bright Light. If you have watched my video about the PC and console release of Deathly Hallows Part 1, which is linked in the description and YouTube cards if you haven't, you will know that the previous game has received one of the lowest Stasocritic scores possible on this channel. But also, if you have been watching my Harry Potter videos, you probably know that pretty much every first iteration of a particular direction is flawed one way or another, and the sequel that continues that direction improves things at least in some ways. Is it the case here with Deathly Hallows Part 2 trying to make the third-person shooter gameplay of the previous game work? Let's find out, as always with the help of my Stasocritic system, the first category of which is design. This is the most important part of Stasocritic with the biggest weight, for as the way a game is played and structured is what defines our experience the most. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 is a competent shooter. That was actually surprising to me because back in the day the player feedback for this game was the same or even worse than for Part 1. So after experiencing Part 1 myself, I was expecting to see an absolute train wreck, but what I've played instead was a game that's not bad. Perhaps not good either, but certainly not bad. Now, in the Part 1 video, I didn't delve deep into all the design issues that game had because I couldn't always differentiate when I encountered a glitch or a problem with actual design. But Deathly Hallows Part 2 doesn't really have any technical issues. Everything is consistent and works properly, at least as far as I could tell. The game also decided to abandon any sort of stealth elements and focus solely on the action part, which was a wise choice. I suppose the best way to describe this game is that it hits all the checkmarks a shooter of this style needs to have. A cover system where enemies that are on the same level as you can hit you but their head protrudes from cover a bit so you can headshot them? Check. UI feedback that shows the direction enemies fire at you from? Check. Changing screen color to signify that you're getting low on health? Check. Shot spread becoming wider the more you fire so you need to balance the need of shooting with the need of accuracy? Check. You see where I'm going. None of those things are particularly enhanced with any game feel effects. You don't really feel the difference between casting a more or less damaging spell, even if there is actual gameplay differentiation. Sprinting just speeds things up, again with barely any visual changes or little mechanical effects like the cover action being available to you from a farther distance if you sprint. Deathly Hallows Part 2 doesn't have mechanics that feel great, it has mechanics that work. There are some exceptions, like the apparat skill that allows you to teleport to a nearby cover feels very satisfying to perform, not to mention it is effective. Or the Petrificus Totalus sniping spell changing the enemy defeat animations when they're dealt with. But the rest of the spells, while do have different visual effects, differentiate only through gameplay functionality, not feeling. And the gameplay functionality is there. There is your standard offensive spell Stupefy and the standard defensive spell Protego. Expelliarmus now acts as a spell that destroys the Protego of your opponents. Confringo is like a grenade that is effective against groups of enemies, while Impedimenta is a multi-lock-on rocket launcher that has a long cooldown but is very effective if you're surrounded. There are also a bunch of enemy archetypes that have different roles, not just your standard mooks, but also snipers and grenadiers, tanks with suppressing fire trying to get to you head-on, as well as a more defensive archetype. The variety of enemies is not particularly big, but it's enough for you to have to use all the spells you've got. The only spell that I would say I didn't use as much is Expulso, the rapid machine gun fire one. because outside of a few boss battles, I don't remember any speedy enemies who could avoid other attacks. But still, you'll find yourself constantly switching spells to fit the current situation, which is actually a pretty engaging act and what shooters should do, thus hitting another checkmark in the list. Of course, combat variety is not enough if it's not supported by a level design, and here Deathly Hallows Part 2 doesn't fall down onto its face either. Each level tries to go for a certain style of play you wouldn't necessarily see in another one. Hogsmeade has a lot of more open areas with plenty of flanking opportunities. The Chamber of Secrets area has a bit of a survival horror vibe to it, where you need to defend against spiders in close spaces while moving towards your goal. There is a level where you stand against giants on a bridge in an attempt to throw them off, a grand staircase area focusing on verticality, and so on. And within the levels there is plenty of pacing variety, like for example in Hogsmeade all the combat arenas are of different sizes and enemy configurations. You're not always on the offensive, sometimes you have to defend from a single location against uncommon waves. This variety also applies to the running towards the camera action sequences that Deathly Hallows Part 2 really loves. But each sequence is a bit different. In one you have to avoid falling rocks, in another you have to shoot objects flying at you, in a third you have to destroy different objects around you to slow the boss down. Perhaps it's not particularly original to reuse such a sequence style regularly, but Deathly Hallows Part 2 tries to make sure that it wouldn't feel the same every time. And the AI in these levels is not amazing perhaps, but also not stupid. The enemies will try to reach you through different means and kill you, so sitting in one place to just shoot out of it a lot of the times isn't actually a viable strategy. You have to either keep moving or make sure to switch your spells around fast enough so you could deal with all the different opponents. There are also some really nice player-friendly mechanics that make certain situations much less annoying than they could otherwise have been. For example, in one level, after setting up explosive spells at the foundation of the Hogwarts-covered bridge as Seamus, you have to then place Neville defending Seamus from the bridge above as he tries to get back to Hogwarts. It would have been easily and incredibly annoying to defend the ally sequence, but it's actually fine because enemies can't damage Seamus unless they get very close, and when not being attacked his health is regenerated, so it is actually a situation that can feel enjoyable to play. What brings Deathly Hallows Part 2 down quite considerably is its length. It's simply too long. You might be asking yourself, did I hear right, Stas? Did you just say too long? This might be surprising considering the fact that the game can be beaten in 3-4 hours was one of its most criticized aspects back in those days, not the least thanks to certain YouTube personalities. But here's the thing. In the context of the mechanics that the game has, the quality of their game feel, the amount of offensive and defensive capabilities as well as enemy archetypes we use those against, Deathly Hallows Part 2 doesn't have enough to sustain a campaign as long as 3-4 hours. Even with all the variety the game tries to include, it feels just too drawn out and would be more interesting were it shorter. For example, the section I've mentioned where we play as Neville protecting Seamus changes up the pacing, but then it happens again and it's still fine, then again and by that point it already feels somewhat tiring, and then once again and now you wish the sequence would end and get switched to something else. And this happens very often in Deathly Hallows Part 2. Protecting the bridge from one giant is enjoyable, then the second comes and it's okay, but when the third one arrives, that's too much. Similarly, with the amount of doors Ron has to open while protect him in the Chamber of Secrets level, with the amount of firefights between Draco and others in the Room of Requirement, with the amount of waves we defend against as Ginny in the Hogwarts entrance courtyard, you get the idea. Same applies to boss battles. There is not enough mechanics in them to justify a longer combat sequence, and if what there is in the game now would work fine if bosses had less health, it can get somewhat tiring by the time you get to the second half of the fight. Even a linear sequence created for narrative purposes of Harry going towards his death as all the ghosts of his loved ones appear to try and alleviate him of his fear manages to last for too long, losing a certain amount of emotional impact in the process.
I'm sorry. I didn't want any of you to die for me. And Remus, your son.
Others will tell Teddy what his mother and father died for.
Someday, he will understand.
But so many. Tonks, Fred, Snape.
Remember them as they were.
I will try to.
Don't mourn them.
Their memories remain.
I will never forget you.
We know.
You're nearly there, son.
We are so proud of you.
You'll stay with me?
Until the end.
Stay close to me.
Always.
So if you open up all the scores for design, feel free to pause if you'd like to read them all. I will assign a 5 to Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. It's a perfectly adequate game. While the mechanics lack quite a bit of polish to make them feel great, the score would have been a 6 if the game had been shorter and prevented itself from becoming too drawn out. But as it is now, while maybe it's nothing particularly special, the game has everything a third-person shooter needs to have. Let's discuss context now. This category has a weight of 1 as it's about things that enhance the experience rather than define it. Plot, motivation, character arcs, and so on. As always, we'll discuss how the game handles this category on its own without relying on the source movie material, and my arguments will for the most part be the same as those related to Deathly Hallows Part 1. Like with Part 1, the recreation of the movie's plot is largely understandable, though lacking in dramatic impact. This is especially saddening when the death of certain prominent characters in the series is mentioned exceptionally nonchalantly.
They killed Lupin. And Fred.
There are also some scenes that never made it into the final cut of the movie, like Draco giving Harry his wand to fight against Voldemort.
Potter!
Which means that this version of Draco is the only one where he makes a first step towards redemption by showing explicit support against the Dark Lord. Unlike the Part 1 game, there are no podcasts or anything that will go deeper into the lore of the world, and some scenes are represented in a rather confusing manner.
Up there! The Horcrux! It's held the Hufflepuff's cup.
It's hot!
They've added Gemino and Flagrante curses. Everything you touch will burn and multiply. We'll be crushed. Hurry!
Harry! How do we reach the cup?
The sword! Keep going! Harry! Come on! Look out!
In here!
We have a deal, Griphook.
I said I'd get you in. I never said anything about getting you out.
And then there are moments that are never properly explained, like why the snitch Harry received in Part 1 opens up when he touches it with his mouth, and that what it contains is the Resurrection Stone, one of the titular Deathly Hallows. Yet, should you open up all scores for context, I will assign a 5. You will understand all the most important parts of the main plot thread in a way that's not particularly boring, and that's enough for this score. Let's move on to aesthetics. This is another category with a weight of 1, again because it is about something that enhances the experience rather than defines it, this time through visual style, music, sound, etc. And this time I will open up the score straight away since there is not much to talk about and assign a 7. This is Deathly Hallows Part 1 with more polished art assets and animations, better environment design, more interesting music, though still one that doesn't reach the levels of Half-Blood Prince game soundtrack. But as you probably have had enough time to see during the footage in the previous sections, there's still quite a bit of technical issues and things that look weird, preventing the game from getting a higher score, even though overall it looks and feels much better than Deathly Hallows Part 1. Time to quickly discuss Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2, and it's all about how well a game connects all of its different aspects together into a single, wholesome experience. And I will open up the scores right away here as well, again because there is not much to discuss, to assign a 5. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 is a third-person shooter first, and the Harry Potter game second. The license is such an obvious skin over gameplay mechanics that there is really not that many things trying to enhance the experience beyond that, but still there is also nothing absolutely ruining it or anything. Now we get to our final category, emotions. This is the most subjective category of Stasocritic, but it's got the second biggest weight, 3, because at the end of the day personal feelings are what matters a lot when playing a game. Now, I will be honest, I believe this title is somewhat underrated. Deathly Hallows Part 2 has been panned so much for being more of Part 1, and I think that's unfair because, well, it's not. If you watch both of my videos, you will see that this game is actually better than Part 1 in pretty much every way. I can't say I liked playing the game, but I also didn't dislike playing it, you know? It's a shooter in a Harry Potter world and it's fine. There were even some moments when I genuinely enjoyed playing it, but most of the time I was just thinking that, yeah, this is a competent game and I don't think it deserves the hate. And you can see that the developers have cared about the game. You don't do details like a different looking main menu depending on your game progression if you don't. You will just have a single variant of a main menu and that's it. I also really appreciate the montage of all the different Harry Potter games that you get after completing this one. For all its flaws, it really is the end of an era, and completing the series of games is still quite a journey to go through. This is why, if you are to open up all the scores for emotions, I will assign a 6. Did I get a lot of enjoyment or excitement out of Deathly Hallows Part 2? No, just at some points. But still, was the game engaging enough to go through it once? Yeah, and that's something. Let's summarize everything. After all scores and their weights are taken into account, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 gets a final Stasocritic rating of 50. It's an alright, absolutely fine, competent game. I think that it has received a lot of negative reputation on the wave of being released after the quite broken Deathly Hallows Part 1, not to mention that many people weren't fans of the third-person shooter direction in the first place, but it's not a bad game. That said, the only people I would actively recommend it to are Harry Potter fans. If you decide to play it, you might have some enjoyable couple of hours. Other people, fans of third-person shooters especially, won't find much here. But still, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 is not horrible like the internet likes to tell you. It's just alright. But nevertheless, it marks an end to a gaming journey lasting 10 years, and that deserves respect. Thank you all for watching. A special thank you goes to everyone supporting my channel. If you like what I am doing, feel free to check out my campaign at patreon.com/farlands, or alternatively, the YouTube membership program that has all the same rewards. All support is greatly appreciated. Thank you.